Hi everybody, it looks like I'm live and it is a Friday here in Fargo. Actually, it's Friday everywhere, unless you're in Australia or somewhere where it's actually Saturday. So this morning I spent my morning doing some free writing. If you know me at all, that's something I recommend that my coaching clients do, and it's something I do on a regular basis. And when I start my day in that way, it really sets me off in a mostly positive direction. And so this morning I wanted to share some insights and some questions that I have from some of my reading, my free writing, and just my observations. And so this will be uploaded later as a podcast episode for this week, and just wanted to start there. So if you're watching live or later, welcome. Hi. If you're watching live, actually, know that you are welcome to put comments here. I will try to watch them as we go. If you're watching later, again, feel free to put your comments in. I just won't be able to address them live. So, yeah, with that, I will start. 3, 2, 1. Hi, everybody, and welcome to episode 164 of Circle Up and Get Real, where we talk about things that matter with people who matter. And today, those people who matter are you, the listeners. Whether you're watching live as I'm recording this on Facebook Live or later, you are the people. You are the ones who matter. And I've been doing a lot of free writing lately. One of the things that I do in my coaching with my coaching clients, and also in the course that we've just completed, the Real Me Intensive course, we do a lot of free writing, or I recommend that we do free writing. One of the things that I know is true for me and anybody in any of my circles, I can't force anybody to do anything. I have no desire to force anybody to do anything. When we feel forced, we resist, and what we resist persists. I know all that. It's all platitudes and cliches, but it's very true. So I will recommend and suggest, and I don't recommend or suggest anything I'm not willing to do myself. So I started my day today with some free writing, and that got me into some really cool places, because if you know anything about free writing, it's when you make yourself, and again, this might be a force and a resist, but you make yourself continue to write for at least 15 minutes, and you keep your handwriting, and you write with a pen, or in my case this morning I wrote with my Apple Pencil on my iPad, and just keep your hand going. And that might mean you write things like, I don't know what to write, but the idea is that that motion keeps you going and eventually gets from your conscious thoughts to your unconscious thoughts. And when do we ever allow our unconscious thoughts to come out? So that's a whole other conversation we could have. But this morning I was reflecting on the book I'm currently listening to and reading, I guess. I have the actual hardcover of it, but I have the audio version as well. And I listened to the first 3 chapters yesterday on Audible. And what I really love, by the way, the book is The Gap and the Gain by Dan Sullivan and Dr. Benjamin Hardy. And this is a somewhat new book. I think it came out in 2021. I'm going to look to make sure. I believe. So it's new to me. And the concepts are not new to me, but I really love noticing what grabs my attention, and noticing when I look back on things, how I got to a place that I've gotten to. And what's fascinating for me recently is that as I look back on the things that have grabbed my attention, I can go back probably 10 years, maybe 15 years. And as I look back, I see the pathway. I see what was leading me to to the place I am right now. And that's been really interesting. And so this book, it's no surprise that this book was recommended by one of my mastermind people, and it's really in alignment with everything I've been studying. So the subtitle is The High Achiever's Guide to Happiness, Confidence, and Success. And when I look at that term, high achievers, I have to step into a space for myself of owning that. And that's been hard over the course of my life to admit or to own that I am a high achiever. Um, some of the actions I've chosen to take over the course of my lifetime might beg to argue with that. Hi, Rosemary. Good to see you here. But the reason that I might have denied my high achiever, you know, I don't know, wiring is because it didn't fit. It didn't fit with other people in my life. And to me, for some reason, belonging was more important than honoring who I'm cut out to be. And I'm learning and undoing that and going back over things and stepping into what's real for me, as should be no surprise to anybody who listens to this podcast, because it's called Circle Up and Get Real. And real, once you declare that, it's kind of hard to undo that. So being real to me means owning what is yours to own and letting go what doesn't serve you or the world. And that can be a process. And for me, only for me, as a verbal processor, it's important that I hear, maybe I'm auditory and verbal, but I have to hear what I'm talking about. And I can hear it by listening later to my podcasts, because sometimes what comes out of my mouth didn't come from my current thinking. It could have come from an unconscious place, or it could have come from a higher consciousness place. And so that's why, for me, it's important to have a space to verbally process and then to have an opportunity to listen to that. So that's been my process. And this book, The Gap and the Gain, is just the newest opportunity for me to take a look at someone else's platform or form, I could say, or framework, and seeing how who I've known myself to be fits or doesn't fit in some cases. So today, in this book, I'm really fascinated by the concept of the gap and the gain. And so what I kind of asked in the title here is, are you in the gap or in the gain? And the way they describe in the book, the distinction is, if you're in the gap, you're in that place between what you have done and the ideal, what you think you want to achieve. And in the gap, you're always comparing yourself to the ideal. And so you're always going to come up short, because you're looking ahead and you're looking at what you haven't done and what you haven't accomplished, because you're looking at the ideal. And they say in the book that this is what high achievers do. And instead, what if we looked at the gain, which means we look backward at what we have accomplished? And when you're in the gain, you're in the gain mindset. You're always looking for positivity and success, whatever that means to you, and achievement that has already happened for you, so that you become more positive about things. So if you looked at what you've already accomplished and celebrated that and allowed yourself some space to stop looking ahead for even a moment, to be able to say, wow, I really have accomplished some things, or I have attracted some opportunities, and I have a great circle of people around me. It looks a lot like gratitude. And in that space, that energy allows a lot more clarity, at least for me, and I become much more positive. Now, I've always been pretty positive. I have a sign in my office. I'm looking up at it right now. It says assume positive intent. And I've had that sign on that little marker board for, I'm going to say, 12 years. It's never been wiped off. And I've taken it with me through many situations in my life. And that is kind of how I've learned to be wired. But this concept of the gap and the gain really makes a lot of sense to me, mentally, but also emotionally and even spiritually, because it allows me the distinction when I'm in a meeting or a gathering to bring the positivity, to bring the space and the energy of gain instead of gap. This is not necessarily, I keep going back to that person who told me that I was toxically positive. It's not toxic positivity. It's not don't own your negative feelings. It has nothing to do with that. In fact, being real would mean own what you feel and give a name to it. That's what we do in our Real Me intensive course. We start examining some of those places where we've been denying our feelings, positive or negative. Real means we own what we call in class, we own both our shit and our shine. and we notice which one, in the terms of this book, which would be the gap thoughts and which would be the gain thoughts. And so we get to own your shit. Yeah, own what doesn't work, own what you've done, own your responsibilities. But what if you own it and then focus on your shine, which is what makes you you and what allows you to be more present. Because if you're in the space of what's real for you, you can be present. You don't have to be thinking about the past or the future. And so often we don't do that. And so anyway, I've given you a lot right there. So this book, this morning as I was listening on my way to the office, he talks about, actually, let me back up a second. In the book, in the audiobook, you get between each chapter a conversation between Dan Sullivan and Benjamin Hardy. They were co-authors of the book, and Dan Sullivan, who has been a coach for 3 decades, strategic coach is the name of his business, and so he's the older and wiser and more experienced coach who Ben Hardy came in to work with. It feels to me like Dan Sullivan is mentoring Ben Hardy, and then Ben is helping him write the book. And in the conversations they have between the chapters, that's where you get some real nuggets. They're not in the book, they're in the audio version. And this morning, Dan Sullivan was talking about how he always starts every meeting that he has, no matter who it is, could be with his staff, his wife. He talks about his wife a lot. He starts it with positivity. And he said, somebody asked him one time, how can you be so positive when the world is so messed up and needs such different thinking? And Dan Sullivan said, I am one of 8 billion people. He said, I can take care of me. And he said, everybody who comes into contact with him, and he named his typical places where he impacts people, he said, everyone will leave with a shot of positivity because that's who I am. And I love that thought. So if you are in gain thinking, if you're in the gain, you would make a difference wherever you go because you would consciously be in positive mindset. Despite what's going on, despite the bad things. You can even come into I'm going to say a bad situation, something that needs fixing. I don't even like that word. Something that needs attention and needs redirection, reframing. You can come into that from the gain rather than from the gap. And what if we would do that with our, I don't know, pick a place, our businesses, our government, our education, our religions. I mean, what if we came into every conversation from the gain instead of from the gap? And then that leads me to a conversation I had yesterday in my Groundswell U course, or it's not a course, it's a gathering place, a community. And one of the questions that we had in our breakouts was, what is your utopia? What does the world look like when it's perfect for you? And that was a fascinating conversation because in my group, I started, no surprise, I started and I said in my utopia, people would be connecting, communicating, and collaborating. We would all be contributing in ways that fill our souls and bring us joy despite or in spite of the need for monetary exchange. And in that space, the monetary exchange would happen more naturally than a push and a have to and a shove and all these kinds of things, the hustle and grind. That was my utopia. And then one of the other members in our group talked about how her utopia, it was really difficult for her to have this conversation because she works with populations that are less fortunate than others. So people who don't necessarily have all of the resources needed for kids and families and things like that. So she said there's a lot of developmental disabilities and a lot of mental health issues that prevent her from even having the conversation about a utopia because she gets into the how of things. And it feels a little daunting maybe. She didn't say it this way, but I was observing that it could feel a little daunting and a little even maybe hopeless to dream this. And I wonder how many of us are there as our wiring. We're maybe gap wired, and we look at things from a place of what needs to be fixed or what needs to be different. And I know that if you look at the Strengths Finder Index, maximizer is one of the strengths that is on my list. And a maximizer always looks for ways to make things better or to enhance things. And if you come to any situation from a gap mindset as a maximizer, you're going to probably naturally point out what's wrong and what needs to be better. And so I wonder if the conversations we could have with communities of people who will help us see what we can't see for ourselves could allow us to have more gain perspective in the places that need to be enhanced or reframed. Because I would be lying if I said the world is perfect right now. Any of the world, any part of the world where you live. It's not perfect. There are lots of things that need new ways of addressing. And I would be naive to think that's not true. Yet, given these distinctions, these opportunities to have conversations that matter with people who matter, and coming into that from a space of the gain instead of the gap, we would have many more dialogue where we suspend previous assumptions in order to learn from each other, than we would come in with our already formulated answer to the problem. That's part of my utopia. That's part of the world I, like Dan Sullivan, want to live in, where I can leave the world better than it might have been if I come in with gain thinking. I come in with the energy of I'm here to serve. I'm here to, I guess when I say make things better, it would imply that they need to be better. And I want to be really careful that I'm not judging things, but I'm only observing them and adding value where I can. So I'm really careful with my language, and sometimes I think I'm too careful because then I don't say what I really, really want to say. Um, I had a conversation this week that was really fascinating because the person I had the conversation with said that I talk too high. I talk too ethereally. And he said you can't really connect with people at a level when you speak above them. And so I've thought about that. And I've thought about, do I do that? Do I speak too, I don't know, hoity, or am I too Pollyanna? For those of you who are young, you won't know who Pollyanna is, but it's a Disney movie about a little girl who's very positive. um, I don't know. To him, I was. To him, he was telling me that my book, Power Tools at Work, is too much. It's too much. No wonder you're not selling any, because it's too much. And he gave me a perspective that had me think about it for a little bit. And I thought, wow, okay, so maybe I do. But then I thought, maybe I don't. So it's so good to come into any conversation from a gain perspective as a dialogue, to suspend previous assumptions in order to learn something. Because for me, when I come in with a dialogue, I can ponder that and go, wow, he had a perspective that was really helpful. He helped me understand things from a different place. And I get to choose, do I take that or not? Do I take a little bit of it? And in an open growth mindset that would allow for a lot of different perspectives, I can take the ones that feel right to me. And then I can go on and, with my gain perspective, with my assuming positive intent, I will make a difference with everyone I come into contact with in a positive way. And some people will resist that, and that's okay. So all of this to say today, if you thought for yourself, here's a couple things. If you think for yourself, do I come from gap mindset or do I come from gain mindset? Just consider, and the book talks about the distinction and says that overachievers, or high achievers, they say, typically come from gap mindset, because they're looking at themselves against an ideal, which in many cases, if we're setting high goals, they're unachievable anyway. We've got the stretch goals, and that's where high achievers look. Are you coming from that perspective, or are you coming from a gain perspective, which might measure you against what you've already accomplished and have you come into any situation with a different energetic focus? And in that space, there's a lot more available, a lot more opportunity, a lot more possibility when you come from that perspective, is what I'm learning from the book. So that's my first question. Do you come from gap or gain? And my second question is, if you had the opportunity to chat with a group of people about your personal utopia, your the world you would want to live in if everything that you wanted to have different was different. What would that be like for you? What would that look like? What would that feel like? And allow yourself to dream about that. Maybe free write about that. Put it at the top of a piece of paper. What is my utopia? And then allow your hand to keep writing for 15 minutes and don't stop your pen or pencil from writing. I don't know what to write. This is a dumb exercise. It's okay. Whatever comes out, comes out. And then allow your unconscious to come into that conversation, because some of those ideas that got buried by whatever force outside of you allowed that might be just crying to come out. So, a lot to think about today, a lot of ideas, and could be a lot of craziness. I don't know, but this is what it means to me to be real. So I'll invite you to do the same thing. As always, get real. See you again. Bye.